Story number 1. The Butcher Baker's Frozen Hunt. The shackles around Cindy Paulson's wrists had frozen to her skin. She could feel the metal pulling away tiny pieces of flesh every time she moved, but the pain didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the sound. Robert Hanson's footsteps crunching through the snow behind her, getting closer. He'd given her a 30-minute head start. 28 minutes had already passed. It was June 17th, 1983, and Cindy was running through the Nick River Valley 40 miles north of Anchorage. The midnight sun cast everything in an eerie twilight that never quite became darkness. She could see her breath crystallizing in the air, each exhale a visible countdown of the life she was desperately trying to preserve. Behind her, she heard the distinct click-clack of Hanson chambering around in his Ruger Mini 14. "You're doing good, honey." His voice drifted through the spruce trees, sickeningly cheerful. "Better than the last one. She only made it to that clearing over there." He paused. "You can probably still see her if you look hard enough. The animals haven't finished with her yet." Cindy's 17-year-old legs burned as she pushed through the underbrush. The handcuffs he'd left on, his signature touch, kept catching on branches, jerking her backwards. She'd seen the Piper Super Cub he'd flown her here in, parked in a small clearing 300 yards back. She knew what happened to the girls he brought to places like this. She'd heard their stories whispered in the bars and streets of downtown Anchorage, but like everyone else, she'd assumed they were urban legends. Missing prostitutes and dancers, sure, but a respected baker from the suburbs hunting them like caribou. That was insanity. The insanity was real, and it was hunting her with the patience of a man who'd done this at least 17 times before. She crashed through a frozen stream, the shock of icy water filling her shoes. Her teeth chattered so violently she thought they might shatter. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, and she was wearing only the thin dress Hanson had allowed her to keep. Everything else, her jacket, her boots, her dignity, he'd stripped away in the basement of his house on Old Harbor Road before driving her to the airstrip. "I've been doing this for 11 years, he'd told her in that basement, his voice conversational as he showed her the collection of IDs. Dozens of them. Young women's faces stared out from laminated cards, and Cindy recognized 3. Joanna Messina, Sherry Morrow, Paula Goulding, girls she'd known from the streets. Girls everyone said had just moved on, left Alaska, started over somewhere warm. "The police don't care about girls like you," Hanson had continued. "Nobody does, that's what makes this work." A rifle shot cracked through the air. The bullet hit a birch tree 6 inches from Cindy's head, sending bark fragments into her face. She screamed and changed direction, crashing through a thicket of devil's club, the thorns shredding her exposed skin. She could hear Hanson laughing, genuinely enjoying himself. "That was a warning shot, sweetheart. When I actually aim, I don't miss. I've got 62 confirmed kills, big game, Dall sheep, bears, wolves. You're honestly not that different. You all run the same when you're scared." Cindy's mind raced through her options. She couldn't outrun him. He knew this terrain intimately, had probably hunted here dozens of times. She couldn't hide. The midnight sun eliminated shadows. She couldn't fight. He had at least 80 pounds on her and a rifle. Her only chance was to make it to the highway. She'd seen it from the plane, a thin ribbon of gravel cutting through the wilderness about 2 miles east. If she could just reach it. Flag down a car. Scream loud enough. Another shot. This one hit the ground near her feet, spraying frozen earth across her calves. She could hear him getting closer, not even trying to be quiet anymore. He wanted her to hear him, wanted her to know escape was impossible. This was the game. The terror was the point. The killing was just the reward he gave himself at the end. "I've got a spot all picked out for you," Hansen called. "Right next to number 12. I think you'll like her. She's been there since '79. Still got all her teeth. Bet you two could have been friends." Cindy's foot caught on a root and she went down hard. The frozen ground knocked the wind from her lungs. She rolled onto her back, gasping, watching Hansen emerge from the tree line. He wasn't rushing. Why would he? He had the gun. He had the experience. He had done this successfully 17 times before, maybe more. This was his element, the Alaskan wilderness that had swallowed so many girls and kept their secrets buried under permafrost and glacial ice. He raised the rifle, peering through the scope with the precision of a practiced hunter. Cindy could see his finger tightening on the trigger. This was it. This was how she died. Alone, terrified, unmourned, her body hidden in some godforsaken hole where no one would ever find her. The sound that saved her life was a car engine. Hansen heard it too. His head snapped toward the sound, confusion crossing his face. The highway was closer than he'd thought. They'd run farther than he'd calculated. A green pickup truck was visible through the trees less than 50 yards away. Someone was there. A witness. The one thing Robert Hansen had carefully avoided for over a decade. Cindy didn't hesitate. She screamed. Not a movie scream, a primal lung-tearing shriek that carried across the tundra like a wounded animal's death cry. She screamed until her throat bled, until darkness spotted her vision, until she saw the truck stop and a figure emerge. Hansen's face transformed. The jovial hunter disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. He could shoot her, dump her quickly, and leave, but the truck driver had seen him, had seen the rifle, had heard her scream. The perfect system was breaking down. For the first time in 11 years, Robert Hansen felt something he'd only inflicted on others. Genuine fear. He ran, not toward his plane, but deeper into the wilderness, the rifle still in his hands. Cindy watched him disappear into the spruce forest like a demon melting back into hell. The truck driver, a pipeline worker named Steve, found her collapsed on the frozen ground, handcuffs still attached, frostbite beginning to blacken her fingertips. He wrapped her in a moving blanket and drove 90 miles per hour to Alaska Regional Hospital in Anchorage. She survived. Barely. What Cindy told the police seemed impossible. A respected businessman, a father of two, a mild-mannered baker who volunteered at his church, was a serial killer who hunted women from a plane. But when State Trooper Glenn Floth started investigating, the horror revealed itself in layers. Hansen's house contained a wall-mounted aviation map with little X marks scattered across the wilderness. Each X marked a body. When they searched the locations, they found remains, 17 confirmed victims with evidence suggesting more. The IDs in Hansen's collection represented women who'd vanished between 1971 and 1983. Some had been reported missing. Most hadn't, because Hansen was right about one thing. Society didn't notice when certain women disappeared. He'd weaponized that invisibility, turned it into a hunting license that lasted over a decade. During his confession, Hansen showed no remorse. He described the murders like hunting stories, complete with details about wind direction and bullet trajectory. He rated his victims on their survival attempts. He kept a journal scoring their performance like a twisted game show. The girl who lasted 3 hours in sub-zero temperatures rated his highest marks. The one who tried to fight him rated his lowest. She'd ruined the sport. Robert Hansen was sentenced to 461 years plus life in prison without parole. He died in 2013 at age 75, having never shown genuine remorse. In his final interview, he expressed frustration that people focused on his crimes instead of his hunting achievements. "I was one of the best marksmen in Alaska," he complained. "Nobody talks about that." Cindy Paulson testified against him despite receiving death threats from Hansen's supporters who insisted a church-going baker couldn't possibly be guilty. She lived the rest of her life looking over her shoulder, jumping at sudden noises, unable to tolerate silence. The sound of small planes overhead made her physically ill. She changed her name 4 times, moved across the country, and died in 2007 at age 41. Officially from natural causes, but friends said terror had been slowly killing her for 24 years. The X marks on Hansen's map numbered 24. Authorities confirmed 17 bodies. 7 women remain missing, their graves marked only on a dead man's trophy wall. Every spring, when the Alaska snow melts, hikers occasionally find bones in the wilderness. Ancient-looking, scattered by animals impossible to identify. Sometimes they're caribou, sometimes they're bears, and sometimes they're the unrecovered victims of a man who turned the last frontier into his personal killing ground. The Nick River Valley still draws hunters every fall. They camp in the same clearings Hansen used. They field-dress their kills in the same spots where women bled out 3 decades ago. The wilderness remembers nothing and keeps every secret, and somewhere in that vast, frozen emptiness, 7 women still wait to be found. Story number 2. The thing that emptied Portlock. The cannery workers found Albert Petka's body at dawn on January 22, 1943. What remained of him, anyway? He'd been torn open from collar to groin, his ribcage spread like butterfly wings. The Chromium Mining Company's night watchman had been a large man, 6'3", 240 pounds, but something had pulled him apart like wet tissue paper. His rifle lay 15 feet away, unfired. Whatever killed him had been too fast for fear, too sudden for defense. Portlock, Alaska was a fishing village on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula, population 75. The settlement clung to Port Chatham's rocky shore, surrounded by dense Sitka spruce forest and the ice-gray waters of the Gulf of Alaska. The nearest town, Seldovia, was 30 miles north by boat. The nearest help was impossibly far away. And something in the forest had started hunting. Andrew Kamluck was the one who discovered Petka's remains. At 52, he'd seen men destroyed by industrial accidents, crushed by falling logs, mangled in fishing net machinery. But this was different. The wounds weren't random. Petka's organs had been removed with surgical precision and arranged in a circle around the body. His heart sat in the center, still steaming in the sub-freezing air. "Nantinuk," whispered Tommy Johnson, one of the Sugpiaq elders who worked the cannery. His face had gone ash-gray. "The big hairy man. He's come back." The legends were old, older than the Russian fur traders who'd first mapped these shores in 1789. The Sugpiaq people told stories of Nantinuk, a massive creature that lived in the deepest parts of the forest. Not quite bear, not quite man, but something worse than either. Something intelligent, something malicious. Something that occasionally developed a taste for human flesh and systematically depopulated entire villages. Andrew had dismissed the stories as folklore. Now, staring at Petka's desecrated corpse, he wasn't so sure. They buried what they could find of Petka in the frozen ground and doubled the night watch. 2 men instead of 1, both armed with 30-06 rifles. They made it 3 nights. On the 4th night, February 1st, the screaming started at 2:17 a.m. By the time the other workers reached the North Cannery warehouse, they found both guards, Frank Jackson and Ole Johansson, dead. Jackson had been thrown through a wooden wall with enough force to shatter 9 of his ribs. The impact crater was 7 feet off the ground. Johansson had simply vanished, leaving only his boots and a blood trail that led into the forest. They followed the trail for 300 yards before it stopped at a cedar tree. Johansson's vertebral column hung from a branch 12 feet up, picked clean of flesh, the skull missing. The thing had learned they were armed. It had adapted its tactics. It was hunting them strategically. Panic took hold of Portlock like a contagious disease. Families refused to let children out of sight. Men traveled in groups of 4 or more, rifles constantly loaded. The cannery closed. Nobody would work the night shifts, and daylight shifts ended at 3 p.m. when the winter sun started setting. The village contracted inward, everyone huddling in the school building and church, safety in numbers. It didn't help. On February 9th, Sharon McLeod disappeared from her own bedroom. Her husband Thomas woke to find her side of the bed empty, the window open, and a handprint on the sill. Not a human handprint. This one was broader, longer, with fingertip marks that had gouged splinters from the wood. The bedroom was on the 2nd floor. Whatever took Sharon had reached up, pulled her through the window, and climbed down with her. In the snow below they found tracks. Massive humanoid footprints, each one 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, pressed 4 inches deep into frozen ground. They found Sharon 3 days later, or what the forest had left of her. Her body hung upside down from a tree branch half a mile from the village, her throat opened, completely drained of blood. Below her, in the snow, something had drawn symbols. Crude but deliberate patterns that none of the Sugpiaq elders recognized. This wasn't natural animal behavior, this was communication, a message. "It's claiming territory," Andrew told the village meeting on February 14th. 30 people packed into the school building, the only structure with a solid door and windows that locked. "It's telling us this land is its hunting ground now." "Then we leave," said Margaret Wilson, her voice shrill with terror. She'd lost her brother to whatever stalked the forest. "We take the boats and we leave. We go to Seldovia, Anchorage, anywhere but here." "In February?" Andrew gestured to the windows where snow fell in thick sheets. "In this weather? We'd never make it. The swells are running 15 feet. We'd capsize before we reached English Bay." "Better than staying here," Margaret shot back. "Better than waiting to be picked off one by one." She wasn't wrong. Between January 22nd and March 1st, Portlock lost 14 residents. Not to accidents or disease, to something that hunted them with increasing sophistication. It learned to avoid traps. It learned which cabins held the most vulnerable occupants. It learned to mimic human voices calling for help from the darkness, luring people into the forest. Billy Swanson, age 16, disappeared after responding to what sounded like his mother's voice screaming from the tree line. His mother had been dead for 2 years. The attacks followed patterns that suggested intelligence. It never struck the same location twice in a row. It alternated between violent public kills, bodies displayed as warnings, and quiet disappearances that left no trace. It attacked on moonless nights and during snowstorms when visibility was worst. It seemed to understand the humans' weapons had limited range and stayed just beyond it, circling the village like a patient predator waiting for weakness. On March 7th, during a particularly savage storm, it attacked the church where 30 people had barricaded themselves. Something massive slammed against the walls, not randomly, but targeting structural weak points. The blows came in sets of 3, methodical testing. Wood cracked. Nails shrieked as they pulled free from beams. Whatever was out there wasn't just strong. It understood construction well enough to know where buildings failed first. The men inside fired through the walls, emptying every rifle they had into the darkness. The pounding stopped. For 10 minutes they heard nothing but wind and their own ragged breathing. Then came the laughter, deep, guttural, unmistakably deliberate. Not an animal sound, not a human sound, something in between, mocking their fear. "It's playing with us," whispered Pastor Hendricks, his faith visibly crumbling. "It could break through any time it wants. It's choosing not to. It wants us terrified." He was right. The psychological warfare was as deliberate as the physical attacks. The creature had learned that fear was a weapon, that anticipation of violence was sometimes more effective than violence itself. Portlock's residents stopped sleeping. They stopped eating. They aged years in weeks, their faces becoming hollow masks of exhaustion and dread. By late March, the decision became inevitable. The village would evacuate regardless of weather, regardless of risk. Drowning in the Gulf of Alaska seemed preferable to being systematically hunted. They loaded 3 fishing boats with everyone who remained. 41 people out of an original 75. 34 dead or missing in 2 months, an extinction-level event compressed into 64 days. As the boats pulled away from Portlock's dock, Andrew looked back at the village one final time. In the tree line, something moved, something massive, standing upright, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair. It wasn't hiding. It was watching them leave, its posture radiating satisfaction. The hunt was over. The territory was won. The survivors scattered, most settled in Nanwalek and Port Graham, the nearest Sugpiaq villages. Nobody went back to Portlock, not to retrieve possessions, not to bury the dead properly, not even to investigate what happened. The village simply ceased to exist, abandoned to the forest and whatever claimed it. In the decades since, occasional hunters and fishermen have explored the ruins of Portlock. The buildings still stand, slowly collapsing under decades of weather. Fishing boats rot at the dock. Personal belongings remain inside homes, dishes on tables, clothes in drawers, photographs on walls. It looks like everyone left in a hurry and never returned. Because they didn't. The Sugpiaq people still won't discuss Portlock in detail. When pressed, elders will only say the village angered something that lived in the forest before humans arrived. Something that occasionally reminds people this land was never truly theirs. Some researchers have tried to investigate, anthropologists, cryptozoologists, paranormal enthusiasts. None have stayed more than a few nights. They all report the same things: massive footprints in fresh snow, sounds of something large moving through the forest, the overwhelming sensation of being watched by hostile intelligence. In 2004, a television crew attempted to film a documentary in Portlock. They lasted 6 hours before their equipment began malfunctioning simultaneously. Cameras dying, batteries draining despite being freshly charged, audio equipment picking up low-frequency vocalizations that made the crew physically ill. They left before dark and refused to discuss what they'd experienced, citing only unexplainable technical failures. Portlock remains abandoned, accessible only by boat, surrounded by thousands of square miles of untouched wilderness. The forest has reclaimed most of the buildings. The dock collapsed in 2008. In another few decades, all physical evidence of the village will disappear, erased by weather and time. But the forest remembers. And whatever emptied Portlock in 1943 is still there, living in the deep woods, occasionally leaving tracks for hunters to find. The Sugpiaq elders know this. They teach their children to avoid that section of coastline, to never camp in those woods, to recognize the signs of Nantiinaq's presence and flee immediately. Because the thing that destroyed Portlock didn't die, it didn't leave, it simply reclaimed its territory and returned to waiting, patient, intelligent, and utterly inhuman. For the next time humans forget whose land this really is. Story number 3. The Seward Highway. Vanishings. The dashcam footage from Officer Rick Brentwood's patrol car showed Jennifer Murphy's Subaru Outback clearly at timestamp 2314 on October 9, 2017. She was driving northbound on the Seward Highway at mile marker 47 between Anchorage and Girdwood. Her brake lights flashed twice as she slowed for a curve. The camera captured this in perfect clarity, the red taillights reflecting off fresh snow. At timestamp 2315, exactly 61 seconds later, Officer Brentwood rounded the same curve. Jennifer's car had vanished. Completely. Impossibly. Gone. The Seward Highway is a 127-mile stretch of road connecting Anchorage to Seward, winding through some of Alaska's most stunning and treacherous terrain. Sheer drops into Turnagain Arm on one side, vertical mountain faces on the other. During winter, it becomes a killing field. Black ice, avalanches, whiteout conditions. The Alaska Department of Transportation averages 200 accidents per year on this road. Dozens of people have died here since it opened in 1951. But people don't disappear. Cars don't vanish from a straight stretch of highway in 61 seconds with no turnoffs, no side roads, no physical explanation. Yet Jennifer Murphy's did. And she wasn't the first. Officer Brentwood immediately called it in. Within 30 minutes, Alaska State Troopers had blocked off mile markers 45 through 50. They searched until dawn, using helicopters with thermal imaging, search dogs, ground crews walking the shoulders. They found nothing. No tire tracks leaving the road, no signs of a crash, no debris, no blood, no Jennifer. Her cell phone's last ping came from mile marker 47 at 23:14, exactly matching the dashcam footage. Then it went dark, not powered off, but signal lost, like the phone had been transported somewhere outside cellular coverage. The case made local news but didn't gain traction. Woman disappears on dangerous highway during snowstorm. Tragic but not mysterious. Probably slid off the road into Turnagain Arm and sank. The searchers would find the car eventually. These things took time, except they didn't find it. Not in 2 weeks, not in 2 months. Jennifer Murphy's Subaru Outback, a 4,000-pound vehicle, had ceased to exist. Then it happened again. March 14th, 2018. Marcus Chen, driving a red Toyota Tacoma, was traveling the same stretch of highway. His wife was on the phone with him when he disappeared. "There's something weird about the road ahead," he told her at 7:42 p.m. "It looks like it's shimmering. Like heat waves, but it's 20 degrees out." The call disconnected. His truck was gone. Alaska State Troopers arrived at 7:59, 17 minutes later, and found the highway empty. His wife played them the recording. Marcus's last words were, "What the hell is that?" Then static, then nothing. The disappearances established a pattern. Both occurred at mile marker 47. Both happened during evening hours. Both victims reported something unusual just before vanishing. And both left absolutely no physical evidence. State Trooper Glenn Morrison became obsessed with the cases. He'd worked Alaska highways for 19 years and seen every type of accident imaginable. Tourists driving off cliffs, locals hitting moose at 80 miles per hour, drunk drivers frozen to death after crashing. But this was different. This violated physics. You couldn't lose a vehicle without a trace. Matter didn't just stop existing. He started investigating historical records and found something disturbing. The Seward Highway disappearances went back decades, not frequent enough to trigger investigations, but persistent enough to establish reality. 8 confirmed cases since 1982 where vehicles vanished from mile marker 47 with no explanation. Always evening or night. Always during specific weather conditions, cold but not storming. Clear enough to see, dark enough to miss details. And the number was accelerating. 8 disappearances across 36 years meant 1 every 4.5 years on average. But 3 had happened in the last 7 months. Glenn started spending nights parked at mile marker 47 watching. He brought thermal cameras, night vision equipment, electromagnetic sensors, anything that might detect something ordinary vision missed. For 6 weeks, he saw nothing unusual. Just a normal stretch of highway, cars passing safely. Tourists stopping to photograph Turnagain Arm. Then on May 2nd, 2018 at 22:07, his equipment went haywire. Every sensor spiked simultaneously. The electromagnetic detector hit levels normally associated with radio towers. The temperature dropped 11 degrees in 90 seconds. And the road changed. Glenn watched through his windshield as the pavement at mile marker 47 began to shimmer, exactly like Marcus Chen had described. The air above the road distorted, creating a lens effect that made the mountains behind it appear to stretch and compress. It looked like heat haze, but his thermometer showed 31 degrees. The effect grew stronger, the distortion more pronounced, until the road ahead didn't quite look like a road anymore. It looked like a photograph of a road that had been imperfectly superimposed over reality. A car approached from the south, a silver Honda CR-V driven by someone who couldn't possibly see what Glenn was seeing. The way the road ahead had become something other than road. Glenn grabbed his radio, shouting for the driver to stop, but he was on the wrong frequency, the wrong channel, and the Honda kept coming at 55 miles per hour. It hit the distortion at mile marker 47, and Glenn's brain refused to process what happened next. The car didn't crash. It didn't swerve or brake. It simply transitioned. That was the only word that fit. The Honda entered the shimmering section of highway and continued driving, but it was no longer on the Seward Highway. Glenn could see this clearly through the distortion, like looking through rippled glass. The road the Honda was now traveling looked similar but wrong. The mountains were different shapes, the sky a different shade of darkness, the shoulder wider than it should be. The Honda's driver showed no sign of noticing anything unusual. Their brake lights flashed once as they slowed slightly for a curve that didn't exist on this version of the highway. Then the distortion collapsed. The shimmer vanished like someone switching off a television. The road returned to normal. The Honda was gone. Glenn sat frozen, his hands locked on the steering wheel, his mind trying to reconcile what he'd witnessed with any framework of reality that made sense. He'd just watched a car drive out of this world into somewhere else, some parallel stretch of highway that existed in the same physical space but wasn't quite the same place. He filed a report. His supervisors thought he'd suffered altitude sickness or carbon monoxide poisoning. They ordered a psychological evaluation. Glenn passed but was quietly reassigned to desk duty. His equipment readings were dismissed as malfunctions. His testimony was labeled unreliable. The official position remained that these were simply unsolved accidents on a dangerous highway, nothing more. But Glenn kept investigating privately. He tracked down families of previous disappearance victims and found something horrifying. The dreams. 6 families reported the same thing. Months after their loved ones vanished, they'd started having vivid nightmares where they saw their missing relative driving an endless stretch of highway. Always night, always alone, always trying desperately to reach an exit that never came. The dreams were too consistent, too detailed to be coincidence. Something was trying to communicate from wherever those vehicles had gone. One father, Daniel Reeves, whose daughter Emily had disappeared in 2003, claimed he'd dreamed her location so precisely that he drove to mile marker 47 and waited. On the anniversary of her disappearance, at exactly the time she'd vanished, he'd seen something. A flicker, a translucent image of his daughter's car overlapping the highway like a double-exposed photograph. She was still in the driver's seat, aged 15 years, visibly terrified, pounding on the windshield. The image lasted 4 seconds, then nothing. "She's trapped there," Daniel told Glenn, his eyes red from decades of tears. "Wherever that road goes, she's been driving it for 15 years. She can't find the end, she can't stop, she's just driving. Forever." Glenn went back to mile marker 47 alone on October 9th, 2018, exactly 1 year after Jennifer Murphy disappeared. He brought camping equipment, high-end cameras, and a notebook filled with calculations about magnetic anomalies and temporal distortions that his supervisors would have called insane. At 23:14, the exact time Jennifer had vanished, the shimmer returned. Glenn's equipment screamed. The road transformed into that impossible overlay, showing two versions of the highway occupying the same space. And there, through the distortion, he saw them. Vehicles. Dozens of vehicles. All different makes and models from different decades, all driving slowly along this otherworld highway. Their drivers visible through windshields. Confused, exhausted, desperate faces. He saw Jennifer Murphy's Subaru Outback. He saw Marcus Chen's red Tacoma. He saw Emily Reeves's 1998 Honda Civic. He saw vehicles from the 80s with rusted paint and vehicles from the 1960s that should have long since decayed. All of them trapped in this loop, this pocket dimension, this stretch of highway that had somehow become separated from normal reality but remained tethered to mile marker 47. Glenn grabbed his radio, trying to broadcast on every frequency, hoping somehow the trapped drivers could hear him. "You're in a loop. You need to stop driving. Break the pattern." Jennifer Murphy's face turned toward him. For 1 second, their eyes met across the barrier between worlds. Her mouth moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Then the shimmer collapsed. Glenn found himself alone on an empty stretch of the Seward Highway, his equipment smoking from overload, his mind shattered by the confirmation that physics was a lie, and reality had cracks where people fell through and never stopped falling. He never filed another report. He resigned from the Alaska State Troopers in November 2018, citing personal reasons. He lives in Anchorage now in a small apartment where he's covered every wall with maps and equations. He's trying to calculate when the shimmer will appear next, trying to find a way to pull those trapped drivers back through before they spend eternity driving that impossible road. The disappearances continue. September 2019, a tourist from Seattle vanished at mile marker 47. April 2020, a local contractor. January 2021, a mother of 3. The Alaska Department of Transportation has erected new guardrails and added reflectors, insisting these improvements will prevent future accidents. But accidents can be prevented. Dimensional fractures cannot. Whatever transformed mile marker 47 into a trap between worlds is still active, still pulling vehicles through at irregular intervals. The highway looks normal. The pavement shows no cracks. Nothing warns drivers they're approaching a zone where reality is worn thin. And somewhere in a place that overlaps our world but can't quite be reached, dozens of people are still driving. They've been driving for years, some for decades. Their gas tanks never empty, their cars never break down. They can't find an exit. They can't stop. They can only drive forward through eternal darkness, occasionally glimpsing the real world through the shimmer, watching other cars appear and join the procession. Every October 9th at 23:14, if you wait at mile marker 47, you might see it too. A flicker in the air, a distortion that makes the road look wrong. And through it, if you look carefully, you'll see them, the disappeared, still driving, still searching for a way home, trapped on the highway that never ends. Story, the Mur 4, the Ketchikan Siren. The salmon cannery at Ward Cove processed 2.3 million pounds of fish annually. Between June and September, it ran 24-hour shifts, the machinery never stopping, the smell of blood and salt water permeating everything within half a mile. Marcus Webb had worked the night graveyard shift for 7 years, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., operating the mechanical evisceration line. He knew the sounds of the cannery intimately. The hydraulic press churning, the conveyor belts rattling, the automated knives processing fish at industrial speeds. So when he heard singing on August 17, 2015 at 3:42 a.m., He knew immediately it didn't belong. The voice was female, impossibly beautiful, rising over the mechanical din like a choir soloist cutting through orchestra noise. It came from outside, from the direction of the processing dock where fresh catches arrived. Marcus stopped working, fish blood dripping from his gloves, listening. The song had no words, just vocalization, pure and haunting, hitting notes that made his chest vibrate. "You hear that?" he asked Tommy Valdez, who operated the grading station 15 feet away. Tommy shook his head, pointing at his ear protection. The industrial headphones blocked everything. Marcus pulled off his own headphones, and immediately the singing intensified, so beautiful it was almost painful. His eyes watered, his throat constricted. The song made him feel homesick for a place he'd never been, longing for something he couldn't name. He walked toward the dock, following the sound. Behind him, Tommy shouted something, but Marcus couldn't process words anymore. The singing was everything. It promised understanding, completion, the end of loneliness. All he had to do was reach the source. All he had to do was find her. The dock was empty except for 3 trawlers unloading the night's catch. Sodium lights cast everything in orange-yellow, reflecting off the black water of Ward Cove. The singing came from below, from the water itself. Marcus leaned over the dock's edge, looking down. Something pale moved in the darkness. A face looking up at him. Female. Young. Beautiful in a way that made his brain stutter, features too perfect to be real. Her hair floated around her head like a black halo, and her eyes were the color of deep water where light doesn't reach. She was singing to him. Only him. The song was a promise and an invitation. "Join me. The water is warm. You'll never be alone again." Marcus swung his legs over the dock's edge. The water was 42 degrees, cold enough to induce hypothermia in minutes, but the woman's presence radiated warmth. He could feel it from here, like standing near a bonfire. All he had to do was drop, let go, sink into her arms. A hand grabbed his collar, yanking him backward. Marcus crashed onto the dock, the spell shattering. Tommy Valdez stood over him, screaming words Marcus's brain slowly parsed. "What the fuck are you doing? You were about to jump!" Marcus blinked, reality reasserting itself in jagged fragments. The singing had stopped. The woman was gone. The water was just water, black, cold, and empty. He'd been seconds from drowning himself and had wanted it with every fiber of his being. "There was someone down there," Marcus stammered. "A woman. She was singing. You didn't see her?" "I saw you about to swan dive into the fucking ocean at 3 in the morning, Tommy said. "Come on. We're getting you inside." Marcus let himself be led back to the cannery, but he kept looking over his shoulder. The water remained empty, but he could still feel her attention, hungry, patient, waiting for the next opportunity. That should have been the end of it. A hallucination brought on by exhaustion or carbon monoxide or any number of rational explanations. Except 2 nights later, Derek Hansen walked off the same dock at 4:15 a.m. and didn't come back up. They found his body 3 days later, washed up at Refuge Cove, 6 miles south. The autopsy showed no signs of struggle, no water in his lungs. Derek had been dead before he hit the water, his heart stopped by causes the medical examiner couldn't identify. His face was locked in an expression of absolute bliss. The cannery workers started talking. The older guys, the ones who'd fished Alaska waters for decades, shared stories over cigarettes during breaks. Stories about the Ketchikan siren, a legend that went back to the Tlingit tribes who'd lived here for thousands of years. They called her Kawat, the drowned woman, a spirit that lived in the deep channels around Ketchikan and fed on loneliness. She found men working alone, men separated from families, men who carried sadness in their hearts, and she sang to them. Her voice promised everything they lacked, and when they followed, she took them below and they never returned. Bullshit, said Marcus, but his hands were shaking as he lit his cigarette. Derek's the fourth one in 20 years, said Ray Coleman, a 60-year-old trawler, captain with a face like cured leather. Lost a deckhand in '98 to the same thing. Tommy Akana walked off the boat during a night haul. We were right there, 30 feet away. Didn't hear a splash, didn't hear him yell. Found his body 2 weeks later with the same weird smile. Before that, in '86, a cannery worker named Peter Jenkins. Same dock you almost went off. Before that? Okay, Marcus interrupted. Say I believe you. Say there's some kind of thing in the water. How do you stop it? Ray stubbed out his cigarette. You don't. You just don't work alone. Don't go near the water at night. And if you hear singing, you run. You don't listen. You don't look. You run until you can't hear it anymore. Marcus started working with headphones on, the volume high enough to drown out everything. He avoided the docks. He made sure someone was always within sight. For 3 weeks, it worked. Then his daughter called, 8-year-old Emma living with Marcus's ex-wife in Seattle, sobbing into the phone. I miss you, Daddy. When are you coming home? The conversation lasted 12 minutes and left Marcus feeling like someone had carved out his chest. He'd missed her birthday, missed her school play, missed everything because he was 1,200 miles away gutting fish to pay child support. That night at 3:17 a.m., the singing returned. But this time it was different. This time it sounded like Emma. Marcus knew it wasn't really her. The rational part of his brain understood this was a predator adapting its hunting strategy. But the rational part was drowning beneath the weight of guilt and loneliness. The voice was perfect. Emma's slight lisp, her tendency to drag out vowels, the way she called him Daddy instead of Dad. It was singing her favorite song, the one he used to sing to her at bedtime. You are my sunshine. His headphones were on, volume maxed, but he could still hear it clearly. The sound bypassed his ears entirely, resonating directly in his brain. He pulled off the headphones and the singing intensified, beautiful and terrible, promising reunion. Just come to the water. She's waiting for you. Your daughter is waiting. Marcus walked toward the dock. Tommy Valdez tried to stop him, grabbed his arm, stepped in front of him, shouted in his face. Marcus shoved him aside with strength he didn't normally possess. The singing controlled his muscles now, his nervous system hijacked by something that knew exactly which emotional buttons to press. He reached the dock. The woman was there in the water, but she'd changed. Her face was Emma's face, aged up by a decade, crying tears that glowed faintly in the darkness. Please, Daddy, I'm drowning. Help me. Why won't you help me? Marcus knew this wasn't real, but it didn't matter. The illusion was perfect enough to override reality. He stepped to the dock's edge, ready to jump, ready to drown, trying to save a daughter who was actually safely asleep in Seattle. The explosion of light made him stumble backward. Ray Coleman stood behind him holding a marine flare, the brilliant red illumination banishing shadows across the dock. The woman in the water shrieked, not with Emma's voice now, but something ancient and furious. Marcus saw her true form for 1 second before she vanished. Gray skin covered in scales, eyes that reflected light like a deep-sea fish, mouth opening too wide to be human, revealing rows of needle teeth. She dove, leaving only ripples. The singing cut off like severed wire. Marcus collapsed, gasping, his mind his own again. Flares, Ray said, his face grim. Only thing that works. Light drives her back. Not for long, though. She'll try again. Marcus requested immediate transfer to day shift. Management denied it. They were short-staffed on nights. He quit instead, willing to break his contract and forfeit 2 months' wages rather than work that dock after dark. The cannery replaced him within a week. They always needed workers. The turnover was high in Ketchikan, though management blamed it on the isolation and weather rather than anything supernatural. Marcus moved back to Seattle, took a job that paid half as much, and refused to work near water. For 3 months, he was fine. Then Emma asked to go swimming at Lake Washington. Marcus stood on the beach watching her play in the shallows, and he heard it again. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The singing, following him. The Ketchikan siren didn't stay in Ketchikan. He pulled Emma from the water immediately, ignoring her protests. He sold his house and moved to Phoenix, 850 miles from the nearest ocean. He avoided lakes, rivers, even swimming pools. Anywhere deep enough to drown, she might be waiting. But every night, lying in bed, he heard her singing. Quiet enough that it might be imagination, loud enough that he knew it wasn't. She'd marked him that night on the Ward Cove dock. He'd heard her true call and survived, which meant he was unfinished business. She was patient. She was eternal. Eventually, he'd be near water again. Eventually, he'd listen. Other workers from the cannery reported similar experiences. Derek Hansen's brother swore he heard Derek's voice calling from storm drains. Tommy Valdez moved inland to Fairbanks and still heard the singing during rainstorms. Ray Coleman retired from fishing entirely but kept flares in every room of his house just in case. The cannery at Ward Cove continues operations. New workers arrive every season unaware of the thing that lives in the channel. Management posts signs warning about the dangers of working near water at night. Slip hazards, hypothermia risk, standard safety theater. They don't mention Kawat. They don't mention the workers who've vanished over the decades. They don't mention that every few years someone walks off that dock in the middle of the night wearing an expression of absolute joy. And in the deep water of Tongass Narrows, something ancient continues to wait. She remembers every man who heard her song. She knows their names, their regrets, their deepest loneliness. She sings with the voices of dead children, lost lovers, forgotten parents, perfectly mimicking whatever will break their hearts and lure them close, because the water is always there. Eventually, everyone returns to the water, and when they do, she'll be waiting, patient, hungry, singing songs of everything they've lost, promising that drowning will feel like coming home. Story number 5. The Fairbanks Frozen Man. The body was still moving when Alaska State Trooper Jennifer Voss found it on December 11, 2019 at 7:43 a.m. Technically impossible. The temperature was minus 47 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze exposed flesh in minutes. The man had been lying in the snowbank for at least 8 hours according to forensic estimates. He should have been a rigid corpse. Instead, his fingers were twitching. His eyes were open, and he was trying to speak. Jennifer had responded to a call about a possible deceased person near the Steese Highway, 14 miles northeast of Fairbanks. Snowmobilers had spotted something dark against the white landscape. She'd expected a typical Alaska winter death, homeless person seeking shelter, tourist unprepared for the cold, drunk driver who'd wandered from a crash site. What she found was David Merrick, 53, a mining engineer from Anchorage who disappeared 6 days earlier while driving to Prudhoe Bay. His skin was blue-gray, crystallized with frost. His clothes were frozen solid, rigid as cardboard. Ice crystals had formed in his eyebrows and eyelashes. His core temperature, when paramedics checked, registered 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Humans typically lose consciousness at 90 degrees. Below 70, organ failure begins. 61 should have meant death hours ago. But David's heart was beating. Slowly, 17 beats per minute, but beating. His lungs were moving, and his mouth kept forming words his frozen vocal cords couldn't produce. Jennifer leaned close, trying to understand. His breath came out as frozen vapor, and she could finally make out what he was saying, repeated like a broken recording. "Don't let me thaw! Don't let me thaw! Don't let me thaw!" The paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, the heater running full blast. By the time they reached Fairbanks Memorial Hospital 12 minutes later, David's temperature had risen to 68 degrees. His heart rate had increased to 32 beats per minute. The doctors treated it as miraculous. Severe hypothermia survival cases were rare but documented. Get him warm. Get fluids in him. Monitor for complications. Standard protocol. At 73 degrees, David started screaming. Not pain screams, terror screams, existential horror screams. His eyes rolled back, his body convulsing against the restraints medical staff had applied when the thrashing started. "It's coming back!" he shrieked. "It's thawing with me! Don't let it thaw! Please, God, don't let it thaw!" The doctors sedated him. His temperature continued rising. 78 degrees, 82 degrees, approaching normal. The medical team celebrated. Jennifer Voss stood in the corner of the room watching, the words, "Don't let me thaw," echoing in her mind. Something was wrong. She could feel it. At 89 degrees, David's temperature spiked. In 90 seconds, it jumped from 89 to 103.7. His skin turned from blue-gray to flushed red. Monitors screamed. His heart rate hit 160 beats per minute, then 190, then 212. The doctors scrambled to cool him, but his temperature kept climbing. 105, 107, 109. His skin started blistering. The blisters popped, leaking clear fluid that steamed when it hit the air. At 112.4 degrees, David Merrick opened his eyes. They weren't his eyes anymore. The irises had turned completely black. The pupils dilated so wide they consumed the entire visible surface. When he spoke, his voice had changed, deeper, resonant, overlaid with something that sounded like multiple people speaking simultaneously. "I told you not to let me thaw." He sat up, the restraints snapping like thread. The medical staff backed away. David looked at his hands, flexing his fingers experimentally like someone testing a new tool. Then he looked at Jennifer, and she felt a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. A spiritual cold that came from being seen by something fundamentally other. 6 days, David's voice said, but David wasn't in control. "I held it frozen for 6 days, kept it dormant. Knew if I stayed cold enough, it couldn't wake up." He smiled, and the expression was anatomically wrong, muscles moving in sequences human faces weren't designed for. "But you had to help, had to warm me up. And now it's awake." He stood. His hospital gown fell away, revealing skin covered in crystalline patterns, frost forming and melting and forming again in geometric designs that hurt to look at. His body temperature was now 114 degrees according to the monitor, but ice kept forming on his skin in defiance of thermodynamics. "What are you?" Jennifer managed to ask. The thing wearing David's body tilted its head. David went somewhere he shouldn't have. Saw something preserved in the permafrost, something old. Older than your species. Older than this ice age. It was dormant, frozen, waiting. The smile widened. He touched it. It needed warmth. It needed a host. So it crawled inside and has been slowly thawing with him ever since. David's body walked toward the door. Medical staff scattered. Security was called, but what were they supposed to do? Restrain a man whose body temperature fluctuated between freezing and boiling, whose touch left frost burns on metal surfaces? "David's still in here," the thing said conversationally. "Screaming. He's been screaming for 6 days. When he realized what was happening, he drove into the wilderness and lay in the snow, hoping to freeze to death before I fully woke. Almost worked." It laughed, a sound like ice cracking. but you people and your biological imperative to save everyone. You couldn't leave him frozen. It walked out of the hospital. Alarms blared. Hospital security followed at a distance but didn't engage. What happened next was captured on parking lot security cameras and later sealed by federal authorities, though leaked footage circulated online for years afterward. David's body stood in the parking lot, temperature monitors showing 116 degrees, steam rising from exposed skin despite the -42 ambient temperature. Then it screamed. Not David's scream anymore, but something that shattered every window within 300 feet. The sound was infrasonic and ultrasonic simultaneously, hitting frequencies human ears couldn't process but human bodies could feel. Everyone within 50 yards collapsed, blood leaking from their ears and noses. Jennifer Voss, watching from the hospital entrance, felt her inner ear rupture. The world spun. She fell, vision blurring. When her vision cleared 30 seconds later, David's body was gone, not walked away. Gone. A perfect circular patch of ground 12 feet in diameter had flash frozen, the asphalt fractured into crystals. In the center, a humanoid shape was burned into the ground in negative, not scorched dark, but bleached white, like something superheated had stood there long enough to alter the molecular structure of concrete. The hunt began immediately. State troopers, FBI, CDC, every agency with jurisdiction descended on Fairbanks. They tracked David Merrick through a series of increasingly bizarre incidents. A gas station where all the freezers shattered simultaneously. A motel where room 217's temperature dropped to -65 degrees while the walls turned hot enough to ignite wallpaper. A school where the janitor found frost patterns on the gymnasium floor that spelled words in some unknown language. They found David's body 5 days later in an abandoned mining facility 40 miles north of Fairbanks. He was dead, finally. Core temperature -12 degrees, frozen solid, every cell in his body crystallized. But his face was locked in an expression of relief. He'd found a way to kill himself, apparently. Frozen himself deliberately in an industrial freezer, overriding the safety mechanisms and locking himself inside until his core temperature dropped below survivable limits. The autopsy revealed impossible contradictions. His organs showed signs of extreme heat damage, proteins denatured, tissues cooked, but they were also frozen solid, ice crystals permeating every cell. He'd somehow died of heat stroke and hypothermia simultaneously. The pathologist who performed the examination described it as a body caught between two states of matter, but the real horror came from what they found in the mining facility. David had left a journal written in increasingly unstable handwriting. The entries told the story. He'd been surveying an exploratory mine site in the Brooks Range when he'd discovered something in the permafrost, a layer of ice that shouldn't exist, compressed and crystalline in ways that didn't match any known geological formation. Curiosity had made him take a core sample. The moment he'd broken through, something had entered him. Not through his mouth or nose, through his skin, through his pores. Microscopic particles that felt like frozen needles burrowing into his tissues. Within hours, he'd felt it spreading. Not infection, colonization. Something that had been dormant for thousands or millions of years, preserved in ice, waiting for warmth. It used his body heat as an incubator. The warmer he stayed, the faster it grew, the more control it took. David had realized he had two choices: die or become a vector for something humanity had no defense against. So he'd driven into the wilderness, stripped down to minimal clothing, and lay in the snow, trying to freeze himself to death before the thing fully matured. He'd almost succeeded. But the paramedics had saved him, had warmed him up, had given the thing the heat it needed to complete its life cycle. The final journal entry, written after he'd escaped the hospital, was barely legible. "I can feel it trying to leave. It's finished with me. It wants to spread, Needs more hosts. Warmer bodies. I'm keeping myself as cold as possible. Stealing ice from freezers, sleeping in snowbanks, anything to slow it down. Going to the mine, going to the old freezer facility, going to lock myself in and destroy the controls. Minus 120 degrees should be enough, should keep it contained. If anyone finds this, don't thaw me, don't autopsy me, burn the body, burn it at high enough temperature that every cell vaporizes. Don't let this spread. The authorities ignored his final request. David's body was transported to a CDC facility in Atlanta for study. Scientists wanted to understand what had infected him, classify it, potentially weaponize it, or develop treatments. Jennifer Voss visited the mining site where David had discovered the anomalous ice. The core sample he'd taken was still there, partially melted. The ice wasn't ice, not really. Under microscopic examination, it proved to be a matrix of crystalline structures that contained preserved microorganisms unlike anything in existing databases. Not bacteria, not viruses, something else entirely. Something that had survived freezing for potentially millions of years, waiting for the climate to change, for the permafrost to melt, for any host warm enough to reactivate them. Alaska's permafrost was thawing at accelerating rates due to climate change. Thousands of square miles of ice that had been solid for millennia were becoming mud. And inside that ice, preserved at temperatures cold enough to keep them dormant, were things that predated human evolution. Things that were about to wake up. David Merrick was the first. In the months following his death, 17 more cases appeared across northern Alaska. People who developed impossible fevers while their skin formed frost. People whose body temperatures oscillated wildly between hypothermia and hyperthermia. People who spoke with voices that weren't their own, claiming to be older than the ice, finally free after eons of frozen sleep. The CDC classified it as a localized outbreak and imposed information quarantine. The cases disappeared from public records. The victims were contained in specialized facilities where they were kept in medically induced comas at carefully controlled temperatures. Cold enough to slow the entity's activity, warm enough to keep the hosts alive. But Jennifer knows the truth. She visits David's grave sometimes, though it's not really a grave. It's a specialized cryogenic facility disguised as a cemetery plot. David Merrick's body is stored at minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that even the thing inside him can't function. They're keeping him frozen forever because they don't know how to kill what infected him without destroying the host body, and they're afraid of what burning him might release into the atmosphere. And every winter, when temperatures drop below minus 40, Jennifer hears about new cases. People who touch something in the newly thawed permafrost. People who bring home unusual ice samples. People who wake something that should have stayed frozen. The number grows every year as Alaska warms, as the ice releases its contents, as humanity discovers too late that some things were buried in permafrost for a reason. Because the cold wasn't just preserving them, it was protecting us. And now the ice is melting, and they're waking up, and there's no way to freeze them again. Story number 6, the Anchorage apartment. Melissa Torres signed the lease for apartment 214 at the Turnagain Arms complex on September 3, 2021. The rent was criminally cheap, $850 a month for a 2-bedroom in Anchorage, where studio apartments typically started at $1,200. The property manager, Richard Dyer, had been almost too eager to rent it to her, barely checking her credit, accepting her deposit immediately, pushing the keys across the desk before she could reconsider. Previous tenant left suddenly, Richard had explained when Melissa questioned the price. "We're just trying to fill it quickly. You know how it is." She should have asked why. She should have investigated what left suddenly meant. but she was a single mother with a 7-year-old daughter working 2 jobs, and $850 a month would give her breathing room she desperately needed. So she signed. She moved in 3 days later. The apartment seemed perfect initially. Second floor, corner unit, large windows with views of Cook Inlet. The previous tenant had left furniture, a couch, a dining table, even beds in both bedrooms. Richard said she could keep it all, seemed almost relieved she would. The place was clean, recently painted, no obvious signs of damage, except for the smell. Faint but persistent, like spoiled meat left in a closed space. Melissa assumed it was something in the vents, maybe a dead animal in the walls. She bought air fresheners, opened windows despite the September cold, ran fans constantly. The smell faded but never quite disappeared. Her daughter Sophia noticed it too. "Mommy, something smells yucky in my room." "I know, sweetie, we'll get it fixed." But Melissa had checked behind furniture, in closets, under the bed. There was no source, just the smell, always there, slightly stronger at night. The dream started on the 4th night. Melissa woke at 3:17 a.m. to find herself standing in Sophia's doorway. She had no memory of getting out of bed, no memory of walking down the hall. One moment she was asleep. The next, she was upright, staring at her daughter's sleeping form. Sleepwalking, she assumed. She'd done it as a child. Stress from the move must have triggered it again, but it happened every night. Same time, 3:17 a.m. She'd regain awareness standing in Sophia's doorway, her hand on the doorframe. No memory of the journey. She started setting alarms, trying to catch herself before it happened. Didn't help. She'd wake up disoriented, alarm blaring, already standing in the hallway. On night 9, Sophia woke up screaming. Melissa ran to her room and found her daughter sitting up in bed, pointing at the window. "There was a man, outside. He was looking at me." Second floor window. Physically impossible. Melissa checked anyway, looked outside at the empty air, the parking lot 15 feet below. No ledge, no fire escape, no way anyone could stand outside that window. "Just a nightmare, baby. Nobody can get up here." But Sophia insisted. "He was right there, Mommy." His face was pressed against the glass. He looked sad and wrong. His mouth was wrong. Melissa started keeping Sophia's curtains closed. The nocturnal wandering continued. She'd wake at 3:17 in Sophia's doorway, and increasingly Sophia would wake too, both of them staring at each other in the darkness, neither quite sure who'd woken first. "Mommy, why do you stand there?" Sophia asked one morning. "I don't know, sweetie. I'm sleepwalking." "But you're awake. Your eyes are open. You're looking at me." That sent chills through Melissa's spine. She didn't remember being awake, just regaining awareness. What was she doing in that gap between sleep and consciousness? What was she looking at with open eyes? She mentioned it to her neighbor, Patricia, a woman in her 60s who'd lived in the Turn-Again Arms for 12 years. Patricia's face went pale. "You're in 214. "Yes, why? How long have you been there?" "Almost 2 weeks. Patricia, what's wrong?" Patricia pulled her inside, away from other residents. "You need to break your lease. Leave. Don't worry about losing your deposit. Just get out." "I can't afford to." The previous tenant was named David Morse. He lived there for 3 months. Before that, Jennifer Hale, 6 weeks. Before that, the Chen family, 1 month. Before that... Patricia ticked off names on her fingers. 16 different tenants in 5 years. Nobody stays, and the ones who do... What happened to them? Patricia's hands were shaking. David Morse jumped from his balcony. Jennifer Hale tried to stab her boyfriend while he slept. Said something was telling her to. The Chen's daughter started talking to someone who wasn't there, drawing pictures of a man with no face. Management keeps renting it because they legally can, keeps dropping the price because nobody will stay. Patricia, that's just... I knew the original tenant, the one from 2016, James Keller. Nice man, quiet, worked as an accountant. 6 months after he moved in, he murdered his girlfriend. Strangled her in that apartment. Room 214, bedroom closest to the kitchen. Patricia gripped Melissa's arm. Sophia's room. That's where it happened. And James swore at his trial that he didn't do it. Said something else had been in the apartment with them. Something that took control. Melissa pulled away, heart racing. That's insane. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to save you. Whatever is in that apartment, it doesn't leave, it stays, and it does something to people. Melissa didn't break the lease. Couldn't afford to. But she started researching. Found the news articles about James Keller's trial. Found forum posts from previous tenants describing similar experiences. Sleepwalking, waking up in strange positions, the feeling of being controlled. Found that James Keller was still in prison, still claiming he hadn't killed his girlfriend Rebecca, still insisting something else had used his hands. The phenomena escalated. Melissa woke at 3:17, standing in Sophia's doorway, but now she was holding things. A kitchen knife, a bottle of pills, a heavy lamp. Objects she had no memory of retrieving, held in positions that suggested intent, purpose, violence. She started locking her bedroom door, hiding the key. Woke up at 3:17 in Sophia's doorway anyway, the bedroom door unlocked, the key back in her purse. No memory of any of it. Sophia started talking to the sad man. Described him in detail, tall, thin, face that looked melted, mouth that opened too wide. He visited her room every night at 3:17, stood at the foot of her bed and whispered things. What things? Sophia wouldn't say. Just cried and begged to move. Melissa set up a camera in Sophia's room, hoping to prove the sad man was hallucination or nightmare. The footage from October 7th showed something worse. At 3:16:53, the bedroom door opened. Melissa entered, moving smoothly but wrong, joints bending at slightly incorrect angles, gait too fluid. She walked to Sophia's bed, stood there. Her face was visible in the camera's night vision, and her expression was blank. Not sleeping, not conscious, something in between. Her eyes were open but showed no awareness. At 3:17 exactly, Melissa's expression changed. Her mouth opened wider than mouths should open. Her eyes rolled back, and she spoke in a voice that wasn't hers. Soon, soon she'll be ready. Then she can see me like you see me. She stood there until 3:41, mouth hanging open, eyes unfocused. Then she closed her mouth, blinked, and stumbled backward, awareness returning. She looked around confused, saw Sophia sleeping, and left the room. Melissa watched the footage 16 times before accepting it was real. Something was using her body during that gap. Something was speaking with her voice. Something wanted Sophia to be ready for something. She packed immediately, didn't care about the lease, the deposit, the furniture. Threw clothes in garbage bags, grabbed Sophia from school, and drove to a motel. She texted Richard Dyer that she was leaving, that he could keep the deposit, that she never wanted to return. Richard's response came immediately. I understand. I'm sorry, I should have told you. It happens to everyone. What is it? James Keller's girlfriend, Rebecca. She died in that apartment, and something about the way she died, the fear, the betrayal, dying at the hands of someone she loved, trapped her there. But she's not a ghost. She's something worse. She's incomplete. She needs to finish dying, and she can only do that by dying again through someone else. She takes control of whoever sleeps there, makes them kill someone they love. Once that happens, she can finally leave. Why don't you close the apartment? Stop renting it? We tried. The management company sealed it for 8 months. But people kept reporting noises, kept seeing someone in the windows, and the smell, it started spreading to adjacent units. Residents complained. So we reopened it, and everything stopped. As long as someone lives there, she stays contained. As long as she has hope of finishing her death, she doesn't spread. Melissa felt nauseous. You're sacrificing tenants? We're preventing something worse. The 3 times we tried to renovate or exorcise the apartment, she expanded, started appearing in other units, started taking control of other residents. She needs to be fed possibility. As long as someone lives there, she focuses on them. Otherwise, she spreads. Melissa never went back. Lost her deposit, lost the furniture, didn't care. She moved to a different part of Anchorage, told Sophia never to speak about apartment 214, tried to forget. But 6 weeks later, she saw the news. New tenant in 214, a young couple, just married. The wife had stabbed her husband 17 times while he slept. She told police she didn't remember doing it, that she'd woken up covered in blood, that the last thing she remembered was going to bed. The husband survived. The wife was charged with attempted murder. The apartment stayed empty for 2 months before Richard rented it again. Rent dropped to $750. A college student took it, lasted 4 weeks before his roommate called police because he'd woken up with his hands around his roommate's throat. The cycle continues. The Turn-Again Arms keeps apartment 214 listed at below market rates. People desperate for affordable housing keep renting it. They last weeks or months before something happens. Violence, attempted murder, unexplained injuries. Some tenants report the same phenomena Melissa experienced. Others have no memory of their time there, just wake up one day realizing weeks have passed in fugue states. The apartment wants to finish dying. Rebecca's death was incomplete, interrupted, left her suspended between life and death. She needs to experience murder from the killer's perspective to balance what she experienced as victim. She needs to complete the cycle, and she'll keep trying, keep taking control of whoever sleeps in that apartment, until she finally succeeds in making them kill someone they love. Patricia still lives in the Turn-Again Arms, watching new tenants move into 214 every few months. She's tried warning them. Some listen and leave. Most don't, can't afford to, need the cheap rent too badly to believe ghost stories. She's watched the pattern repeat 19 times now. Watched people move in hopeful and move out traumatized. Watched one couple not move out at all because the girlfriend didn't survive. And every night at 317, Patricia hears it, even from her apartment 2 floors down. The sound of a door opening, footsteps moving down a hallway. And sometimes, if the night is very quiet, a voice that isn't quite human whispering, "Soon, soon, soon." Story number 7, The Dalton Highway Runner. Tyler Kaufman's dashboard camera captured it first at timestamp 0247 on November 4, 2020. He was driving northbound on the Dalton Highway, the infamous haul road that runs 500 miles from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay, servicing Alaska's North Slope oil fields. November in the Arctic meant total darkness, temperatures at minus 32 degrees, and roads that could kill you in dozens of ways. Tyler had driven this route 400 times in 6 years as a freight hauler. He knew every mile marker, every dangerous curve, every spot where ice formed unpredictably. He didn't know about the runner. The figure appeared in his headlights at mile marker 173, sprinting down the highway's center line, human-shaped, moving fast, faster than any human should move. Tyler's truck was traveling 60 miles per hour, and the figure was pacing him, not falling behind, not pulling ahead, matching his speed exactly, legs pumping in rhythmic strides, arms swinging with mechanical precision. Tyler slowed to 50. The figure slowed to 50. Tyler accelerated to 65. The figure matched him, Always the same distance ahead, approximately 200 feet, always centered in the road, always running. "What the fuck?" Tyler muttered, grabbing his CB radio. "Any trucks near mile marker 173? You got eyes on something weird on the road?" Static answered. The Dalton Highway was one of the most isolated roads in North America. Encounters with other vehicles happened every 30 to 60 minutes, not every few seconds. Tyler was alone out here with whatever was pacing his truck. He flashed his high beams. The figure didn't react, didn't turn around, just kept running. Tyler's mind cycled through explanations. Drunk person, someone fleeing a crashed vehicle, hallucination brought on by exhaustion, none fit. Nobody could run 65 miles per hour. Nobody could survive exposure to minus 32-degree weather wearing what appeared to be ordinary clothes. Nobody should be out here at all. Tyler grabbed his phone to record but had no signal. Typical for the Dalton. His dashboard camera was recording automatically at least. Evidence. Proof this was real. The figure ran for 17 minutes. Mile marker 173 to mile marker 191, 18 miles at sustained 60-plus miles per hour. Then it simply stopped. Stood in the center of the road, forcing Tyler to brake hard, his truck shuddering as anti-lock brakes fought for traction on black ice. He stopped 30 feet from the figure. Through the windshield, illuminated by headlights, Tyler saw it clearly for the first time. Male-shaped, average height. Wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, no jacket, no hat, no gloves. Face obscured by shadow despite the direct light. And it was staring at him. Tyler could feel the attention like physical weight. Then it started walking backward, not turning around. Walking backward, maintaining eye contact Tyler couldn't actually see but felt. It walked backward at the same speed Tyler was, driving forward, maintaining that exact 30-foot distance. Tyler's speedometer showed 25 miles per hour. The figure walked backward at 25 miles per hour, as smooth and steady as if the road were moving under it rather than its legs moving over the road. Tyler's rational brain struggled against the evidence of his eyes. This violated physics. Humans couldn't do this. The cold alone should have incapacitated this person minutes ago. The exertion should have exhausted them. The backward walking was physically impossible at this speed. But it was happening. The dashboard camera was recording it. This was real. The figure walked backward for 32 miles. Past mile marker 200 through the Atagun Pass, over elevation changes and curves that should have made backward walking suicidal. It navigated every obstacle perfectly, never stumbling, never looking behind itself, always maintaining that 30-foot gap. Tyler's hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. His eyes burned from staring, afraid to blink, afraid the figure would do something worse if he looked away. His CB radio occasionally crackled with traffic from other drivers, but nobody was near enough to see this. Nobody could confirm he wasn't losing his mind. At mile marker 232, the figure stopped. Stood motionless in the center of the road, still facing Tyler's truck. Tyler stopped again, engine idling, breath fogging in the cabin despite the heater running full blast. For 90 seconds, nothing happened. Just the figure standing there, Tyler sitting in his truck, the Alaskan wilderness surrounding them in absolute darkness. Then the figure raised one arm and pointed at Tyler. Not at the truck, at Tyler specifically. Through the windshield, through the distance, it pointed directly at him. And Tyler felt something change. Felt something notice him, really notice him in a way that made his hindbrain scream in primal terror. The figure turned and walked off the road into the darkness beyond the headlight's reach. 3 steps and it vanished, swallowed by night. Tyler sat trembling for 5 minutes before he could convince himself to drive again. He continued north, watching the road obsessively, expecting the figure to reappear. It didn't. He reached Prudhoe Bay at 0620, unloaded his freight, and immediately reviewed his dashboard camera footage. It was all there. The running figure, the backward walking, the pointing. Proof he wasn't hallucinating. Proof something impossible had happened. He posted the footage online. Within 24 hours, it had 300,000 views. Within 48 hours, other drivers started sharing their experiences. The Dalton Highway runner had been sighted before, dozens of times, maybe hundreds. The accounts were disturbingly consistent. Drivers would encounter a figure running or walking on the highway, always at night, always between mile markers 150 and 250. The figure would pace vehicles at impossible speeds, walking backward or running forward, always maintaining a fixed distance. Then it would stop, point at the driver, and vanish into the wilderness. Most drivers who'd seen it dismissed it as illusion or exhaustion, but some reported something worse. After being pointed at, they'd experienced a compulsion to return, an overwhelming urge to drive the Dalton Highway again, specifically at night, specifically in the stretch where they'd seen the figure. The urge would build over weeks, becoming obsessive until they had to return. Tyler felt it starting 3 days after his encounter. An itch in his mind that whispered he needed to drive north again, needed to find the figure again, needed to understand what it wanted. He ignored it for 2 weeks. The compulsion grew stronger. He started dreaming about the Dalton Highway, about mile marker 232, about the figure standing in his headlights. He'd wake up with his car keys in his hand, no memory of getting out of bed to retrieve them. On November 26th, he drove north again. Not for work. He had no freight to haul. Just to drive. Just to look. He reached mile marker 173 at 0247, the exact time he'd first seen the figure. It was waiting for him. This time it didn't run. It stood in the center of the road facing his truck. Tyler stopped 50 feet away, his camera recording. The figure walked toward him slowly, deliberately. With each step, Tyler's headlights illuminated more detail. The flannel shirt was old, decades-old style. The jeans were faded. The boots were work boots from an era before modern manufacturing. The figure reached the truck's hood, stood 3 feet from the windshield, and Tyler saw its face. Wrong. Fundamentally wrong. The features were humanish. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but arranged slightly incorrectly, like someone had drawn a face from memory without understanding the underlying structure. The eyes were too far apart. The mouth was too low on the face. The nose sat at an angle that defied symmetry. And it was smiling. Not a human smile. A smile that showed too many teeth. Teeth that were too uniform, like chiclets rather than evolved biological structures. The figure raised one hand and placed it on the hood. Metal groaned under impossible pressure. The hood began to crumple inward, steel deforming like aluminum foil. Tyler screamed and threw the truck into reverse, tires spinning on ice, engine roaring. The figure didn't chase him. Just stood in the road, smiling, watching him retreat. When Tyler reached a curve that blocked his view, he turned the truck around and fled south, driving 80 miles per hour on roads that could kill at 60, not caring, just needing distance between himself and that thing. He sold his truck a week later, quit his job, moved to Juneau, as far from the Dalton Highway as you could get while remaining in Alaska. He never drove professionally again, but the compulsion didn't stop. Even 1,200 miles away, he felt it. The urge to return, the need to drive north, the certainty that the figure was waiting for him at mile marker 232, that it had marked him somehow by pointing, that he belonged to it now in some way he didn't understand. Other drivers who'd been pointed at reported the same thing, the compulsion to return. Dreams of the highway, waking up driving north with no memory of how they'd gotten behind the wheel. 3 drivers had disappeared entirely, quit their jobs, left families, drove north, and were never seen again. Their trucks were found abandoned on the Dalton Highway in the 200-mile marker range, doors open, engines still running, no sign of the drivers. Theories proliferated online. Ghost of a construction worker killed during the highway's building. Alien entity studying humans. Interdimensional traveler. Tulpa created by collective fear. Nothing fit perfectly. Nothing explained why it could pace vehicles at 70 miles per hour. Why it could walk backward faster than humans could run forward. Why its face was wrong in ways that suggested it was wearing humanity as an ill-fitting costume. The Alaska Department of Transportation denied everything. Dismissed the sightings as fatigue-induced hallucinations common among long-haul drivers in extreme conditions. The dashboard camera footage was explained away as shadows and lens artifacts. The disappearances were attributed to accidents or voluntary departures. But the drivers know. They share information through private forums, warn each other about the danger zones, compare experiences. Mile markers 150 through 250, 0200 to 0400 hours. Any night between October and March when darkness is total, those are the conditions, those are when it appears. And if you see it, if it points at you, you're marked. The compulsion will begin, you'll dream about returning, you'll wake up with your keys in your hand. You'll find yourself driving north without meaning to. You'll feel it calling across hundreds of miles, patient and persistent. Some drivers fight it successfully. Change careers, move out of state, avoid driving at night. Others can't resist. The compulsion becomes too strong. They return to the Dalton Highway, drive into the darkness, and aren't seen again. Their trucks are found days or weeks later, abandoned but intact. No signs of struggle, no clues about where the drivers went. Tyler still lives in Juneau. He doesn't own a car anymore. Takes the bus, walks, avoids driving entirely. But some nights he wakes at 0247 standing in his living room, car keys that don't exist anymore clutched in his hand. Some nights he dreams he's driving north, the Dalton Highway stretching endlessly ahead, and something is running beside his truck, keeping pace, waiting for him to stop. And, in those dreams, he knows he'll return eventually. The compulsion will win. Maybe in a month, maybe in a year, but eventually he'll find himself driving north, drawn by something stronger than fear or logic. He'll reach mile marker 232 at 0247. The figure will be waiting, smiling its wrong smile, ready to show him why it marked him, what it wants from those it points at. The Dalton Highway remains open, traveled by hundreds of drivers every week. Most see nothing unusual. Some see the runner. And those who get pointed at, they don't talk about it publicly anymore. They just disappear one by one, drawn back to that dark stretch of road where something that almost looks human runs at impossible speeds through -30-degree darkness, patiently collecting whatever it marks. Because once it points at you, you belong to it, and eventually it collects what it owns.